Welcome to Constructing the Oral Message. I'm Lauren Morgan, and I'll be walking you through the similarities and differences between writing and speaking, adapting your writing skills for speaking, and finally, how to structure your message and outline so you can give an effective speech. When learning how to construct an oral message, most people start with what they know from writing. And while there are many similarities between constructing a written message and constructing an oral message, there are some significant differences, especially because your audiences are different. Written messages are designed to be read, while spoken messages or oral messages are meant to be listened to, and therefore, the person constructing the message needs to consider what those similarities and differences are so they can be most effective in each. Most people are surprised to find out that actually, when adults are measured for their time communicating, we spend most of our time speaking and listening. And yet, in school, we've spent most of our time learning how to write. So when you learn how to construct a message for oral delivery, you actually are learning how to improve your overall communication skills, especially by looking at those similarities and differences between oral messages and written messages. There are three major differences between readers and listeners that have an impact on how someone constructs a message. So the first difference is that readers can read more slowly. They actually have the text of the message in their hand, and if they're struggling to understand the message, they can simply read at a slower pace to take the information in so that they can understand it. In listening to an oral message or listening to a speaker, a listener cannot listen more slowly. There's no adjustment button somewhere behind our ears that allows us to adjust the pace of the speaker. So when constructing an oral message, speakers need to be aware of their pace and how much information they are trying to share in the allotted time that they have to share that message. That's something that can be managed when someone is constructing a message. The second major difference between readers and listeners is that readers can reread and study the message. In other words, they have the text of the message in front of them. If they want to go back and reread something to clarify their understanding, they are able to do that because the text is in their hand. They can also put the text aside and pick it up again at a later time because it's manageable for them. It's under their control. Unfortunately, in an oral situation, a listener cannot reread and study. The listener simply is presented that message orally in the moment, and if they've missed something, the speaker has already moved on to other information. However, when constructing an oral message, a speaker can build in and utilize devices for speaking and structures for speaking that will enable the audience to reread and actually study information so that they can remember it. And the final difference between readers and listeners is that readers can access a dictionary. If they come across a word that they are unfamiliar with, they can look that word up so that they can better understand the meaning of the message. In an oral situation where we have a set of listeners can't just get up in the middle and go grab a dictionary. Sure, they might be able to look something up on their phone, but in a lot of cases that would be considered rude to the speaker. So speakers need to be aware of the language that they're using and be using terminology, phrasing, words themselves that the audience can easily understand. Remember that communication occurs when there is shared understanding. So the speaker needs to know something about the audience and be adapting and constructing that oral message so that the audience can have enhanced understanding of the message. While many people starting out in constructing oral messages really try to draw from their written experiences, What often ends up happening is that the speaker actually wants to write the message out much like an essay. Unfortunately, for the type of speaking that you are learning, that's not an effective technique to utilize because we're using extemporaneous delivery, and writing out your message is constructing what's called a manuscript, which most often encourages memorizing or trying to read from the manuscript, and we don't want to do that. So instead, what we use is an outline. And the best analogy to an outline is to think of a road map. So on a road map, it doesn't provide you every single detail of what is on the route that you are covering, but what it does is highlight the key points, perhaps key signs that you need to be looking for, or landmarks, or it's going to give you turn-by-turn directions that are going to be appropriate at the moment that you hit that turn. An outline is similar. An outline is going to provide the speaker the big ideas, the main points, the subpoints in keywords, and then a couple of ideas for supporting details. It will also provide the speaker ideas for the introduction to get the audience interested in the speech and listening, and then a message at the end to close the speech and remind the audience of what was talked about. So if you think of an outline like a roadmap of the message, it makes it much more easy to understand how to utilize the outline and to make sense of the elements of construction for the oral message. When constructing an outline, there are 3 organizational principles that need to be considered. The first organizational principle is that your speech or your message will have an organization whether you intend it or not. And what that means is the minute you stand up in front of an audience and you start speaking, that becomes the introduction to your speech or the first thing that you say. The second thing that comes out of your mouth is going to be the second thing that shows up in the structure of your message. So when it's left to chance, or someone is just improvising the speech off the top of their head, the message could come out jumbled, it might not make sense, and it certainly could cause some difficulty for the audience in understanding what the speaker is saying. When a speaker is intentional about organizing and makes choices about how to begin the speech, how to develop the speech in the body with the main points, subpoints, and supporting details, and then how to close the speech with a conclusion, the speaker has a much higher chance of being successful in the audience because they're making their message intentional. So when you're creating your speech or your oral message, you really want to be intentional with the choices that you are making. The second organizational principle that you want to think about is the fact that organization determines the success of your message. And what that means is that when you are organized, you have a much higher chance of being successful with your audience, as was said previously. In fact, you might be a speaker who has great delivery or lots of charisma, and the audience may be wowed by your delivery. But after the speech, if they're asked about what the message was, the audience may say, I don't know, I can't remember. I don't really know what the person was speaking about, but boy, were they a great speaker. In that case, you haven't really fulfilled your responsibility as a speaker, because delivery, while important, isn't more important than the message. You really want your audience to remember what you have to say, not just how you said it. The third organizational principle that you want to keep in mind when you're constructing an oral message is that signposts such as previews, transitions, and reviews can help the audience to listen, reread, and know new terms. So remember previously we talked about the differences between readers and listeners. Readers have the message in their hand and have a lot of control over that message, where speakers are essentially at the mercy of, listeners are at the mercy of the speaker. how fast the speaker speaks, how well prepared the speaker is in terms of construction of the message, and whether or not the speaker has been thoughtful about the type of language that they're using. Signposts, as you will see in the image in front of you, are actual devices that are used in a speech to help the audience stay on track with the speaker. For example, as a speaker transitions into their first point and they say, first, let's talk about X. That signpost or transition helps the audience know where the speaker is in the speech. If a speaker says, now that we've talked about X, let's talk about Y as they move into their second point, again, that's going to help let the audience know where the speaker is. Previews in a speech help the audience know what's coming. Most often, a preview is used at the end of the introduction to let the audience know what the main points are that they'll be listening to in the body of the speech. A review statement is typically used as a speaker moves into the conclusion to help remind the audience of what the main points of the speech were. If that sounds repetitive, it is. And oral messages are designed to be repetitive in order to help the audience remember what the speaker has said. Sometimes what happens to a speaker when they are constructing their message is that they can't see the forest for the trees. If you look at the message in front of you, or the image in front of you, you can see that that is a wide shot of a forest. To say that a speaker has become lost in the forest or they can't see the forest for the trees means that they are focusing on each of the details. Those details are in the next image, all of those individual trees. In other words, they sometimes get caught up in the details, and there are so many details, they can't get a bird's eye view to see the forest. So what a speaker has to do is really think about showing the audience the forest first, the big picture, then going in and just picking 3 maximum trees to talk about, and then coming back out again at the end to show them the forest. So that's an easy analogy to utilize in thinking about how you construct an oral message and a speech. Big picture, a few details to focus on, and back out to the big picture. There is one overarching tool that can really help prevent a speaker from getting caught up in the details and keeping their message simple and organized so the audience can understand it better. And that is the principle of the rule of 2s and 3s. And the rule of 2s and 3s says that main points and subpoints are divided and subdivided into no less than 2 and no more than 3 parts. So again, if you look at the image in front of you, you will see that part of the rule is main points and subpoints. You can also add supporting details, are divided and subdivided. That means you're going to take your main idea and divide it into 2 or 3 parts, and then each one of those 2 or 3 parts you're going to subdivide into 2 or 3 segments. At any level or any part of your outline, you can have no less than 2 parts. That means if you have a Roman numeral 1 for a main point, you have to have a Roman numeral 2 for a main point. If you have a capital A for a subpoint, you have to have a capital B for a subpoint. There are endless possibilities in how you can organize a speech utilizing that no less than 2 principle. Also, you cannot have any more than 3 parts. So again, if you have a Roman numeral 1 and 2, you can have a 3, but not a 4. And when I said you can have endless possibilities of organizing, if you think about it, if you had 4 main points, Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, and 4, you actually could take 1 and 2 and combine it and make 1 main point that has 2 subpoints, A and B. And you could take 3 and 4, combine it, make 1 main point, and have 2 subpoints, A and B. In outlining, if you keep the structure, or you keep following the rule of 2s and 3s, it will make it very easy for you to be able to create a succinct message with solid development that you can utilize within the time frames that you've been given to speak. So what does an outline look like that follows the rule of 2s and 3s? You can see two samples in front of you. They are just skeletal outlines without content, but the one on the left shows you what a 3-point outline would look like with 3 subpoints and 3 supporting details underneath each subpoint. The other outline shows you what an outline would look like with less than 3, but no less than 2 main points. So you can use this image as a framework for you to think about what any outline would look like for a speech. When you organize your message utilizing the principles that we've talked about, you're really going to gain a couple of key benefits. The first benefit is for the audience. If you follow these rules for structuring your message and use the tools for helping to listen, reread, and know new terms, your audience will have an easier time following your message, making meaning of your message, and in the end, remembering what it is that you've had to say. In addition to benefiting the audience, there are also benefits for you as the speaker. It will be easier for you to also remember what your message is. Most of the time when I ask students if they can remember 2 or 3 things in a list, they can. And so if you use that rule of 2s and 3s, it makes it easy to remember what the things are that you are going to talk about. And when you start getting into subpoints and supporting details, sometimes from research, limiting those details and subpoints to 2 or 3 key ideas also limits the amount of information that you're going to share, limits the amount of information that you remember, and makes it easier for you as a speaker. So overall, when you construct your oral message and use these principles, it enhances your success as a communicator. While there are many organizational patterns that you'll see on the slide in front of you that you can choose from to organize your speech, no matter what organizational pattern you choose, if you follow the rule of 2s and 3s and use the devices that have been discussed in this video, you will be able to construct an effective oral message. So as you construct your oral message, remember these couple of key points. Be intentional in how you want to organize, as it will add to the success of your message. Follow the steps that have been laid out for you so that you can construct a message effectively. Employ the rule of 2s and 3s to make sure that your structure is effective, and then create your outline so that you have a roadmap for a message. If you follow these guidelines, there is a very good chance that you are going to be highly successful with your speech.